We are at the penultimate hour. Just 2 episodes left before the massive finale, and the stage was perfectly set. I am bringing you a complete explainer today, doing a deep cinematic breakdown of exactly how Season 5, Episode 7 completely fumbled its monumental setup of an immortal Homelander. If you're studying screenwriting, character arcs, or even just film pacing, let me explain this to you as a masterclass in exactly what not to do. Remember how we left off the previous episode? We were hanging on this terrifying edge-of-your-seat cliffhanger. Billy Butcher screaming "Run!" absolutely set the tone for what we all assumed would be a total bloodbath. But as we open this episode, let's really look at how all that built-up momentum simply vanishes. Instead of carrying that incredible kinetic energy forward right into the climax, the pacing flatlines almost immediately. It literally leaves us, the audience, completely unmoored from the high stakes we were just promised. Instead of that visceral panic we were promised, we are immediately thrown into Oh Father's propaganda machine. We watch Homelander sit behind the desk in the Oval Office, acting less like an unhinged immortal threat and more like a bored dictator. Notice how his God complex is framed in the scene? He's dictating these sweeping authoritarian policies, banning abortion, dissolving state borders, mandating strict biological rules, essentially declaring the world is now entirely under his thumb. But cinematically, this brings the narrative to a screeching, frustrating halt. We wanted a physical rampage, and instead, what do we get? A political pulpit. It slows the momentum down to an absolute crawl right when we should be accelerating toward the grand finale. Right in the middle of these ego-driven speeches, Homelander drops this specific line. Now, I immediately caught this heavy-handed reference to the legendary film The Usual Suspects. When a character drops a quote like that, as a movie fan, you naturally lean in. You expect a massive cerebral twist where the narrative completely pulls the rug out from under you. But let me explain how the writing completely failed to deliver here. It was just an empty line. It promised a level of narrative trickery and intelligence that this episode fundamentally lacked. It was a stylistic tease with zero structural payoff. You cannot invoke one of the greatest plot twists in cinematic history without actually having a genuine trick up your sleeve to justify the reference, you know?
To truly understand why this Oval Office scene feels so incredibly hollow, we really have to look at its origins in the source comics. In the books, the White House climax is a visceral, unhinged massacre. It is the bloody, terrifying visual culmination of Homelander completely losing his mind. But here on screen, the narrative frustratingly trades the golden rule of show, don't tell for tedious political monologuing. I mean, the president is quietly dealt with off-screen. Trading absolute chaos for quiet dialogue completely neuters the terrifying physical threat Homelander is supposed to represent at this exact moment. Visual storytelling demands that we actually see the destruction to feel the stakes, not just hear about it happening behind closed doors. This brings me to the cluttered side quests that are actively ruining the pacing of this hour, starting with Ashley. Now, Ashley is a character who has survived entirely on fear, but right now she is tragically blinded by her own delusional sense of success. She genuinely believes she has made it to the very top, marveling at her own survival while violently silencing her split persona. She even rejects Sister Sage's brilliant plans out of sheer inflated ego. But let's look at the story structure for a second. This internal battle, while totally consistent with her cowardly character, feels like completely irrelevant narrative bloat when the world is literally ending. It completely deflates the tension of the primary A-plot by dragging us into this low-stakes B-plot filler that fails to drive the central conflict forward in any meaningful way. Speaking of irrelevant filler, we have to talk about the baffling integration of the Gen V characters. We see Marie and Jordan inexplicably tracking Oh Father in Car 407. Let's break down why this makes absolutely zero narrative sense step by step. An immortal Homelander is the actual existential threat right now. The boys are desperately working on the single weapon that might actually stop him. So why on earth are 2 incredibly powerful supes wasting precious screen time tracking a non-threat sidekick like Oh Father? It's literally like walking into a final exam completely unprepared, and instead of trying to figure out the answers, you go sit in the hallway. It defies all basic cinematic logic and entirely wastes the immense potential of these incredibly powerful characters.
I noticed this specific piece of dialogue from the Gen B characters during their bizarre side mission, and it really stood out. Marie essentially admits her power levels aren't what they were hyped up to be. And honestly, it perfectly and painfully describes the writing quality of this entire narrative arc. Reports of my awesomeness have been greatly exaggerated. It serves as this unintentional meta-commentary on how the show hyped up these massive apocalyptic stakes, only to deliver an incredibly deflated, meandering storyline. When your own characters are overtly vocalizing how underwhelmed they are by their own capabilities, you better believe the audience is going to feel exactly the same way about the script. Meanwhile, the complete mistreatment of legacy characters just continues. I watched the Deep get reduced to an entirely irrelevant punchline. He's confronted by a shark, hilariously but totally distractingly voiced by Samuel L. Jackson, who warns him to never enter the water again because a new water-controlling soup has claimed the oceans. Think about this from a foundational character perspective. You have taken the aquatic soup and permanently exiled him from the water. You have entirely stripped him of his cinematic identity. He is now just a guy standing on land, waiting for a pathetic, insignificant death that the writers clearly no longer care about. The sheer absurdity of the cameo drastically undercuts whatever lingering drama this character had left.
So, what is the countermeasure here? How do our heroes actually plan to fight an immortal god? Let's meticulously trace the step-by-step technical execution of the boys' desperate plan. First, they discover through a Russian dossier that Soldier Boy's unique power to vaporize Compound V was born from intense atom bomb-level radiation. Second, they go and secure raw uranium from Fort Harmony. Third, Frenchie brilliantly steps up to calibrate this highly complex device. And finally, their grand plan is to heavily irradiate Kimiko, attempting to artificially recreate Soldier Boy's V-burning blast right within her. It's a solid, desperate scientific scramble that actually feels earned by the plot. It gives real weight and texture to their resistance, making the science feel appropriately grounded in this universe's chaotic lore.
As this massive weapon is being forged, Frenchie tries to get Sister Sage's help, but she flat out refuses. This beautifully illustrates a really fascinating psychological block. She is paralyzed by the profound guilt that her unmatched intellect completely failed to calculate the one variable that ruined everything, and that variable was love. The smartest person in the entire world is sidelined not by a lack of intelligence, but by her profound inability to comprehend human emotion. It's one of the few genuinely deep character beats in the episode, perfectly showing how raw, unpredictable humanity disrupts pure, cold logic. It's a stark, brilliant reminder that in a world full of superpowers, the most disruptive force remains basic human connection.
But just as the team prepares this desperate weapon, the script's pacing stumbles right back into a ditch. Butcher and Huey are captured by Synapse, a completely unnecessary shoehorn soup who traps them in a mind-reading psychic prison. Huey is already devoid of motivation, feeling like fighting an immortal is a totally lost cause. And instead of moving the physical plot forward, the writers trap our main characters inside their own heads. In visual storytelling, relying on an internal psychic prison right before the climax is a glaring sign that you are just burning screen time. It artificially halts physical momentum and locks the entire narrative in a repetitive holding pattern. Inside this psychic prison, Synapse actually forces Butcher to hallucinate Kessler, but I have to point out that from a structural standpoint, this scene adds absolutely nothing new to Butcher's cinematic arc. We already know exactly who Billy Butcher is. We know he's ruthless. We know he is entirely willing to sacrifice his friends to achieve his ultimate mission against Homelander. Spending precious minutes having a mind control soup reiterate established character flaws to an audience that is already way ahead of the script is the very definition of narrative stalling. It is redundant exposition masquerading as character development.
Now, we absolutely must talk about the bitter disappointment of Soldier Boy. He wakes up from cryosleep, drops some fun and Polar references for the diehard fans, and takes one look around. He expresses pure, unadulterated disgust at Homelander's vanity. Homelander is literally building a theme park to worship himself, and Soldier Boy is repulsed by what a fragile, egotistical shell his son has become. And the blocking and spatial tension in this room, it is palpable. The way they circle each other, the heavy, suffocating silences between their lines, you are literally sitting on the edge of your seat waiting for the inevitable clash of titans to just tear the room apart.
And then, Soldier Boy delivers this crushing emotional revelation. He looks right at Homelander and says, "I didn't give you the V for you. I did it because I loved Clara." Clara, meaning Stormfront. It completely shatters Homelander's twisted, lifelong desire for parental validation. But how does this incredible emotional climax actually resolve? Soldier Boy is immediately anticlimactically choked out, without a single punch being thrown, and shoved right back into his cryotube. It is absolutely baffling. You have an immortal Homelander, and you don't give the audience even a 2-minute action sequence. It is an incredibly frustrating waste of a cinematic confrontation that had been building for multiple seasons.
While that massive disappointment is happening, the episode descends into pure, unfiltered tonal chaos elsewhere. Oh Father is holding a psychic test screening for his pro-Homelander propaganda, trying to read the real emotional reactions of his captive audience. But when things go wrong, instead of using his powers to quietly handle the situation, he unleashes She-Line and Dognot, who brutally butcher the entire room. It is loud, excessive gore that causes massive tonal whiplash. It literally feels like it belongs in a completely different, much cheaper slasher film. It feels sloppy and disconnected, awkwardly juxtaposed against the heavy emotional letdown we literally just witnessed with Soldier Boy.
However, amidst that excessive, almost cartoonish gore, I did appreciate one deliberate visual and narrative choice. We see Starlight finally winning a fight and organically saving a woman who was caught in the crossfire. Now, this wasn't just action, this was foundational narrative groundwork. By saving this civilian, who will undoubtedly remember and spread the word, the writers are organically planting the seeds to restore Starlight's heroic public image. It is a classic planting and payoff technique. It's a small, brilliantly executed beacon of actual character progression in a sea of blood, proving that the writers can still craft meaningful arcs when they focus on action with real consequence.
Let's move to the climax, and honestly, what I consider the only genuinely compelling cinematic sequence in this entire hour: Frenchie's tragic end. When you analyze Frenchie's psychological journey from the very beginning of the series, his core trauma was believing he was entirely undeserving of love. But here, having finally found love, and having successfully calibrated the weapon to give Kimiko a fighting chance against Homelander, his character arc was definitively complete. Structurally speaking, there was nowhere else for him to go. He had finally conquered his demons, making his sacrifice feel inevitable, deeply resonant, and structurally sound within the broader narrative framework of the show.
I absolutely love the cinematic framing of his final moments. Frenchie dies looking Homelander right in the eye, absolutely refusing to bow. The camera pushes in close, anchoring us to his unwavering expression. He knows Homelander is immortal now, and he knows he is mere seconds away from death. But his defiant gaze beautifully proves that Homelander's manufactured godhood is ultimately hollow. The visual blocking here perfectly communicates the theme. You can have all the physical power in the universe, but if a mortal man refuses to fear you in his final breath, you are no god. It was a perfect, heartbreaking send-off.
But naturally, just as we get that profound moment, the writing totally falls apart again. Homelander violently kills Frenchie and then just turns around and walks away. Let's trace the physical logic here step by step. He completely ignores the fact that Sister Sage, the smartest person on the planet, and Kimiko are hiding inside a lead-lined pipe right under his nose. I mean, think about it. If you are an immortal god hunting down your greatest enemies, and you look at a pipe that you know you cannot see through because of the lead, wouldn't that be the very first physical place you check? It is absolutely mind-numbing that he simply walks out of the room.
The script attempts to clumsily justify this, of course. Homelander's excuse is essentially, well, I killed one of them today, I'm immortal, I have all the time in the world, I'll come back for the rest. Let me be crystal clear as we analyze this. This is nothing but lazy plot armor. It is a fabricated excuse designed entirely to artificially stretch out the narrative into the season finale. Homelander knows they are actively building a weapon that can strip his powers, yet he flies away simply because the episode runtime demands it. It completely shatters our suspension of disbelief and completely ruins our investment in the stakes.
And so, as the credits finally roll, I am left entirely frustrated. We are missing critical plot resolutions. Like, where is Ryan? What was the actual structural point of that whole Gen V detour? Instead of answering these massive narrative questions, the episode's crucial moments were completely overshadowed by endless stalling tactics. They had the ultimate setup, and they squandered it on filler. So to wrap up this explainer, I leave you with this provocative thought as we head into the finale. When a story makes its villain completely invincible, does it truly elevate the stakes, or does it just expose the writer's inability to craft a logical, compelling conclusion? We'll find out next time.